Welcome my friends, today is all about new photography gear. If you're thinking about diving into the hobby or the industry and you don't know what to get, what to invest in, what kind of gear that you really need to get going, well, I wrote a list and I'm telling you all about what you need based on my experience. And well, what's that worth? Who am I? My name's Stefan Malik. I do a lot of photography and filmmaking news, reviews, and tutorials here on YouTube, but I'm also a professional, accredited, internationally award-winning photographer. And I've taken a few pictures. I know a few things now. I hope this helps you out. So if it does, consider hitting that like and subscribe button. We got a lot to cover today and we're diving right in. We're going to assume that you're going to be picking up an interchangeable lens camera system, which means you have a camera and a lens. But if you're just starting out with a cell phone or something, that's totally okay too. These tips are going to apply to everybody across the board. It doesn't matter what budget you have or what experience level you have. This is just to kind of get you going and think about what you might need either now or shortly into the future when you start maybe making some money from photography or you just save up a bit. And the first thing is going to be a camera, of course. Now, what kind of camera do you need? Can it be a little bit older? Should you buy new or used? How many megapixels? There's so many questions, and I really want you to just simplify it. You do not need the best and the most magnificent camera, the most expensive camera. I don't care if you have $1 million, it's not gonna really do you any good because it's really not the gear. Gear's important, but your skills as a photographer are much more important. I can guarantee you if you've never picked up a camera before, I can grab my cell phone and take better pictures than you can with my $10,000 camera setup. So let's talk about cameras and what you need. Okay, so let's squash the megapixel rumor right off the bat. You don't need a huge high megapixel camera. More isn't always better. We've got crazy high megapixels, 62, 70, 100. It's just going insane these days. And the fact remains that you really don't need a heck of a lot of megapixels to get really great results. In fact, there's even software that can take really low megapixel images and convert them into higher, more detailed images just with a click of a button. So you really don't need to spend that extra money on a high megapixel camera when a medium to low megapixel camera will probably do you just fine. And having said that, the more megapixels, the harder it is on your computer, your storage, your wallet. Buy the camera that you can afford, but honestly, you're better off investing in some lenses or glass. That's the stuff that's really gonna make the difference, because even if you have a really high megapixel camera and a really not so great lens, it's not gonna resolve all those megapixels because the glass quality just isn't there. So baby steps here, guys. We're gonna try and keep it simple for you. Buy the camera that you can afford, of course. Don't go crazy on the camera. They say that you should date your camera and marry your lenses, because you're probably gonna have your lenses hopefully longer than your camera bodies because, well, they're coming up and they're improving all the time. So do keep that in mind. Now, it doesn't matter what camera system you choose, whether it's Canon, Sony, Nikon, Fuji, they're all great these days and you really can't go wrong. Of course, everybody has their own preference, but it's up to you to do your own research. And honestly, you're gonna be able to take great photos with any camera system. A few things that I personally look for in a camera is value, battery life, ergonomics, and again, they're all gonna have different pros and cons depending on the manufacturer, but really consider what you like best and what feels comfortable for you and maybe go that route. Don't be swayed by online groups and things. People are always gonna have their preferences. Just go with what you like. So what about choosing between a full frame and an APS-C or crop sensor camera? How do you know which one to get? Well, there's definitely pros and cons to each, and we'll talk about a few of those now. Typically, full frame cameras are a bit bigger, heavier, and more expensive, and they also come with, obviously, a bigger sensor. Now with that bigger sensor, you're typically going to get better image quality, dynamic range, and overall performance. An APS-C or crop sensor camera is going to basically have a cropped sensor, meaning you will be able to get a bit more reach, which actually can be a benefit depending on what you're shooting. Here's an example of ISO performance between a full frame and crop sensor camera. As you can see, the full frame does perform a little bit better, but like I said, you're going to pay for it. And the camera body's not going to be the only thing that's more expensive. Full frame lenses are also going to cost you a lot more money, so do keep that in mind when it comes to budget. Also be aware that you can use full frame lenses on an APS-C camera, but you can't use APS-C lenses on a full frame camera without going into crop mode and sacrificing megapixels. So as you now know, there are pros and cons to each, and it's going to be up to you to decide which one's going to be better for you, but if budget has anything to do with it, you'll probably start off with a crop sensor camera. Next up, let's talk lenses. Now there's small lenses, there's big lenses, there's lenses that are expensive and there are lenses that are cheap. Lenses are the tool that we use for the specific job. Now, like I said, I would really recommend you spending the money on a really great lens and a decent camera rather than a really great camera and a decent lens. You're just gonna get better results. So when it comes to choosing a lens, you really have to think about what you're gonna be shooting. What do you wanna be practicing in photography? Are you gonna be looking at wildlife and birds specifically? Well, then I consider something like a telephoto here. Do you want to shoot macro, get in really close and look at fine details and things? Well, maybe think about a macro lens. If you're interested in portraits, you're going to want a fast prime lens, probably something like this 85 f1.8 here. So there's a different lens for different purposes, and it really depends on what you want to shoot personally. There's no perfect lens, but if your camera does come with a zoom lens rather than a prime lens, which means one zooms and one doesn't, well, I would maybe recommend something like a zoom lens, like a standard zoom lens, a 24-70 or around there, which is going to give you all around great performance and let you shoot a lot of things decently. Now, for the sake of time, I'm not going to go into everything to do with the lenses in this video, but do your research, and if you plan on buying used, make sure you thoroughly test them out to make sure they're working properly. And if you don't really know what you're looking for, I will leave a link here for you to check out if you want to maybe do some tests to find out if that lens is any good for you. Next up, you'll need a memory card. Of course you will. This is the thing that houses and stores your photos, and there's a lot to know about memory cards, but what I'd recommend is buy the best one that you can afford, but nothing too crazy. Buy the middle of the road, and if you don't know what to look for when purchasing a memory card, here's a little bit on that. I want to keep this simple for you because looking at all these little numbers can be a bit overwhelming. Now, the first thing you want to consider is what kind of card that you need. In this case, we're going to talk about just a micro SD card here and your regular SD, which is probably going to be what your camera takes. There are some other different types, but for this video, we're just going to stick to the most common and basic ones. First of all, think about how much space you're going to be using. If you plan on shooting any video in 4K especially, I recommend you getting at least 128 gigabyte or even a 256 gigabyte because it adds up really quick. If your camera can't shoot a lot of frames per second, you're going to want to have some room just in case you see something awesome and want to capture everything. So obviously the more space you have, the less you have to worry about, and these days, getting these bigger cards is actually pretty reasonable when it comes to price. Next, we'll talk about speed classes. You'll typically see 2, 4, 6, 10, U1, and U3. These are the speed classes, and if you want to be shooting at high speed and of course recording in 1080p or 4K video, you want to have class 10 and ideally U3. This is kind of the standard these days, and I'd recommend something like this card, which really isn't that expensive, but the last thing you want is to have a cheaper card and run into a bottleneck when your memory card just can't keep up with your camera. You might also notice a read and write speed as you see here on your SD card. Some of them have them, some of them don't, but make sure you go over to their manufacturer's website to check what the read and write speed is that you need depending on the shooting that you're going to do. Again, to simplify things, I would totally recommend this card for you, the SanDisk Extreme Pro. For whatever you're doing, it's going to cover you for a lot of bases, and also is going to be something that you can grow into, and it's really not that expensive. It's also worth mentioning that you might want to invest eventually into some kind of backup as well, whether it's your computer's hard drive or an external SD, something that you can have a place to put your photos other than your memory card, because they will and do fail over time. Next up, I recommend that you buy and carry always a spare battery with you. There's nothing worse than getting out there and finding a great subject and then realizing that your battery's dead or you forgot it entirely. So definitely pick up a spare battery. Every camera manufacturer is going to have different batteries with different battery life. And there's always a third-party option, which is typically cheaper, but make sure you do your research to find out which battery is right for you. But for me, I always carry a couple batteries at least when I'm out for the day or for the week or wherever I'm going. I always have spares, so definitely make sure you have a spare battery. All right, the next thing on the list is a bit of a luxury, but it's a strap upgrade. Now, you don't really need it, but it is really nice to have, especially if you're toting around big, heavy lenses. This is gonna save you. It's gonna really save you when it comes to fatigue. It's just a better experience overall. I'd always recommend the Peak Design straps, and they are a little bit pricey, but honestly, they're worth every single penny. This is really the first thing I do when I buy a new camera. I order a new strap, or I've probably got one lying around. I throw that on and off I go. So definitely consider that. If you think I'm lying, head to the camera store, pick up one of these things and try it on before you buy it. Honestly, it makes a huge difference. And if you're shooting all day, you're gonna thank me later. Next up is an absolute necessity when it comes to anybody getting serious about photography, especially if you're into things like landscapes, macro, or long exposures. Really, the list goes on. A tripod is essential for a lot of photography because it really allows you to get your shutter speed low and capture that amazing detail, especially in low light. There's so much you can do with a great tripod. Now, you don't have to spend $1 million on one either. Definitely don't buy the cheapest tripod. I would really recommend spending a little bit more than you think that you should, because honestly, that thing is going to be probably good for years to come. I own a few tripods and I would completely recommend them to you. They have different purposes and uses. And like I said, you don't need to buy the most expensive one, but definitely don't buy the least expensive one. Find something right in the middle that meets all your needs. There's a ton of reviews, obviously, here on YouTube and elsewhere. So when it comes to tripods, you're definitely going to need one eventually. Maybe not on day one, but it's a fantastic and essential tool. Next, you're gonna need somewhere to keep your camera when you're out on the road, and you're gonna need a camera bag, of course. I recommend a smaller camera bag, and if you can, don't always take all of your gear. You want to take as little as possible, of course, to avoid fatigue and overwhelm, but I like to have a few different bags depending on where I'm going and for how long. And there's a ton of camera bags these days. Once again, don't buy the most expensive one, and definitely don't buy the cheapest one. Find something that works for you. There's a million options, and I'll drop down in the description some of the ones that I'd recommend. Next, inevitably, when you are getting serious about photography, you're going to need to learn how to edit your photos. And to do that, you're going to need a computer, and a pretty darn good one. I would 100% recommend you dive right into something like Adobe, Photoshop, or Lightroom. There's a photography package that they offer that is fantastic. You're definitely going to need to learn how to edit your photos to really take things to that next level. That's just non-negotiable. So consider that you'll probably end up needing a computer, a decent monitor, lots of RAM, lots of hard drive space. You're gonna need to spend some money on this stuff if you really wanna get serious about it. But if you are on a budget, don't worry. There's a lot of even free programs that can do the job for you with as little as your phone. But again, to take it to that next level, you're really gonna want to invest some time and some money to learn the pro software that we all use to really get the best results. A few last things that I really recommend is patience, lots of patience. Learn from YouTube, learn from friends, join a photography club or association. There are a million different resources. Be gentle with yourself, watch yourself grow and get better with every single picture. And remember, you're doing this for you, for nobody else. Don't worry about the rules. In fact, try and do everything you can to break the rules. And if anything else, do it because you love it. And that's what photography is all about. So I hope you liked this list today, guys. I hope it helped you out. And if it did, make sure you hit that like and subscribe button. Make sure you drop down in the comments any and all ideas, or of course comments or things that I might have missed that might help people, or even me. If there's something that I missed that I don't know about, make sure you share that with me as well. Thanks so much for watching, guys. Like always, make mistakes, be yourself, and get out there and take some more pictures. See you next time.